Art therapy, in my opinion, has upcoming from psychology, and I would say that expressive art coaching or art coaching has a bit different approach, trying not to work on a psychological foundation but more on an artistic foundation. So we don't have a psychological framework, we don't interpret what is happening in a psychological framework, but try to let it be on an artistic level. And then by the end of a session, doing some how can you use what has shown up in this creative lesson, creative work? How can you use that for your everyday life, your everyday challenges? I also think a lot of art therapy is doing that, but at least once, art therapy was a lot analytic and very psychological. And I found it much more interesting to work on a more artistical, or one could also say a more philosophical or phenomenological approach or framework. So is what is making art coaching different from art therapy, I would say. But today they learn from each other, and they have, I think today there's a lot of different ways of working with art as a mean of personal development or therapy as well, and finding resilience. I really like the openness that you don't have to put back what is happening to a certain framework. I really like this openness of experience, so you can be intimate with the human experience and see what happens in that work with the artistic means and the being together as persons, without that it has to be interpreted on a certain psychology framework or a certain philosophy, a certain metaphysic in a way. You can say there's a lot of philosophy in the work, but the work is about trying to let the experience be open and see what happens. And then by the end of the work, try to harvest all what has shown up. And this is not that much shown up from our framework, but by having a great openness, one can also see being mindful with the process and with the work. That's what I really like. That's really freedom. I would say it's freedom, and it's also open up a lot what we can do, what we can create as humans alone and together, and not being that stuck in a certain framework, not that biased. I think we are often very biased mentally. I am too. And I think that's the great effort of art and the great effort of being in a creative process, is that we can come into a bigger freedom, a bigger openness, that let the process, let the materials, let the moment take you somewhere that you couldn't plan, that you didn't expect. And this is what I'm working with and really fond of in the art coaching process, is meeting the unexpected, not meeting our theories. It's not about drawing our theories. It's also not even about drawing or creating our feelings like we normally used to put our feelings in words or something. It's meeting the unexpected and then see what happens in me when I meet something that was not planned. The first part of the job, one as a facilitator, of course, have to create a safe space, but also have to invite people to be together with themselves and others in a slightly different way than if we meet normally in a cafe and so on. But in fact, it's not nothing mystically or something, because I guess all of us, at least as kids and as children, had tried this just to be in the moment, just to create something with the few things that are around, just to fall down. I think this work, what I also really like, is that it has something to wondering, start to wonder. But to get into that, we first, maybe you could say, have to get a bit out of our concept, out of being so mental that we normal are as grown-up people. I mostly work with grown-up people, and I like that a lot. Some exercises I can do is also just to start with a bit of silence, a little mindful practice, or doing some sensorial work that you just have to do something very simple, just have to paint with closed eyes, do a drawing, and not to draw something specifically, but do it as a dance or follow a music, something so you get deeper into your senses. And this is not something that I think that is a very human quality that all of us have. This about having senses, and that we can act and listen through our senses and with our senses. Maybe we are not that often invited to be in a place or in a room where it's the senses that lead us. Normally it's our concept or it's our explanation or something, but this in art coaching, this is not very interesting. It can be very good to work with your concepts and so on, but we have a lot of places we can do that. But in art coaching, we really try to get deeper into our senses, and also to be attentive. And then when we have that attention in the room, and every person have it, but also in the room and in the group, then I give another challenge. Then I could pass about another material, and then you have, and then often with a limited time. So I said, okay, now you get that material. It could be clay, it could be a piece of wood, and just a few strings. So often very limited materials, and then you say, now you have 5 minutes or 10 minutes to create something that gives you pleasure. So it's not about putting one of your concepts into artwork. No, not at all. It creates something that brings you pleasure, or something that feels good. So we are working with the senses, not with the concept. And then in a limited time, like 5 minutes. And then very often something beautiful, something significant will come out of such a limited work. And then I could jump to another work, or we can then do another thing with that little piece of art that arrived in these exercises. So it's about also coming into a flow and not let people have too much time to think in a way. We will think by the end of the work. But when we are in the work, we will follow the flow and being in our senses and images, you can say, that emerge, inner images that you put into work, and working with a lot of art forms. It can be drawing, it can be sculpture, it can be movement, and so on. It can be creative writing with poems. And so there's a lot of art forms. And also this about shifting from one art form to another or present other materials has a very bring in a new impulse that your senses can follow and bring something unexpected. In my work, it's a big point not to give it a meaning too early. And I can feel that sometimes people are very eager or very fast about giving something a meaning, too fast. And because if we do it too fast, often we just put the meaning that we normally do. I have experienced that before and so on. So I try to let us stay in the work in a way, and then later, by the end of a session or by the end of a workshop, or maybe in the middle, we make a reflection or you share it with a colleague and so on. But it's more to be in contact with what is happening and with the artworks on a very sensual level, and really to witness, to see what is here, see all details before you enter into this mental interpretation. Often these mental interpretations are not very interesting and not very unexpected. They're repeating what we already know. So the longer we can stay without coming into that, and then do it very later, and then really, and do it not just by repeating our stories, but by being in contact. If I'm creating a sculpture without some materials that maybe I've not been working with since I was a child or something, and really being in contact with that, and then by the end of that, if it's an individual session, I can lead a dialogue with this piece of art. And then by the end, we can say, from all what you have experienced by creating here and the process itself, and also meeting the artworks that emerge, if all that, we bring all that together, is there something there that somehow surprised you and that could help you with the challenge you have in your normal life? And then maybe we have identified just by the start of the session that, okay, today I would like to work with how I'm feeling on my workplace or something like that. But then we just touch that this is the theme, that it's important for your normal life. And then we put it beside, and then we do all the creative work without relating directly. And then by the end of the session, we come back we then question, what happened here in this creative process? Does it bring you any new ideas or any impulses or a new feeling that you might could bring in in your everyday life. So this is the trick in the expressive art coaching that I am educated in and fond of, is this decentering, is not to often, not always, but very often, not to work directly with the issue, the personal issue, but let it be and come back. I think just in itself, just to be allowed, or just to allow yourself, just to be in the process, just to create something without that it has to have any very direct goal and so on, just to get into that space of flow and creating and being new senses. In itself, it has a lot of benefits, I think. You can say it's an active meditation and so on, but it's also it's very active. So you also see that you are able to create something. So I think that in itself, the process in itself, bring resilience by allowing you just to take a pause, a creative pause. But of course, also when you then come to by the end of the session, also come into what could be the meaning of this artwork if you relate it to your everyday life. Of course, you can also there harvest a lot of new ideas, but also energy, because often maybe if you're going through a phase where you're stuck, often in the creative work you will see you're not stuck. You created something, you are in flow, and you can bring some of this energy into your stuck situation in a way. If you're in a creative process, you also sometimes will meet obstacles, hurdles. Something is not turning out how you would like it to be, or something is getting a bit ugly, or you're doing something and having an error, a fault. Something is, as I said, could be a bit ugly, but you still have to create with it. And I think so you have to accept there's something that turns out differently that you wanted. But very often you will also, you end up liking that. And you can see you can turn your faults into something else. Your faults, the fault in the artwork. So I think you have to accept that something that you didn't want turns up, but you will also see that you are able to accept it, but also to turn it into something beautiful or something that you somehow like, maybe even that it's still ugly in a way. It also have to do with connection, which is also a part of the resilience. So you have to share something that you created a bit, but it's also have its own life. It's another talk, but something that's important to me, but something that you co-created, and then to share it with somebody and see that they witness it. It's a very strong support to have something that often is, your artwork is often something surprisingly, but also often strong. It can also be vulnerable. And to share this with another person, not just to have the everyday talk in the normal language we do, but in this much broader language. It can be language, but also the piece of art. This is a very strong support. It's an act of humanity to me, this sharing on a deeper level, sharing artworks and witnessing. It is very strong. If you see how you can turn something, if we are in the middle of a session and we are meeting the artwork that have appeared in the work, then I will always try to sense if the person talking with the artwork is in contact with the artwork. If you're really, do you see the artwork when you are saying, or are you just interpreting, are you repeating your mental ideas, or are you in contact? Because something magical happens when we are in contact with our senses and so on. So this is a way trying to get out of our normal stories and being really in the moment. And of course, being there in the moment and in contact with the artwork or with a movement or what it is. There we will experience something, and it will also have a response in us. So of course it will also trigger or tell our stories once again, but in a new way. So the starting point is to have this contact in the creating, but also afterwards by meeting the artwork, is being in contact with the materials, with the artwork, and talking from there and acting from there. And then I can ask, how is it to be standing here in front of this artwork? How it is to be there? Do you feel good to be there, or do you want to move a bit closer? Do you have to have a bit more distance? So we're working with the relation right here, right now, and not talking about the situation. This reminds me about when my mother said to me that I could not be blah, blah, blah or something. And then we get all that story and you lose the contact. You're not in contact with the artwork. And then you're just flying on your stories. This is where we try to get out of our habits, our mental habits, by being in sensorial contact and see what happens, and then have by the end a reflection. What could they tell you? What can you use that you needed to sit with your back up of your artwork? We found out that you really had to be in contact with the artwork that was created. You needed to touch it with closed eyes and so on. Does it tell you something that maybe you should sometimes be a bit indirectly in contact with things in your everyday life? I'm a coach. I'm not the one to tell the other one, but we can just reflect on it and talk about it. How could you really like to be in contact just with your hands, not with your eyes? How could you also maybe practice that in your everyday life? Because that brings you pleasure, it brings you new energy and so on. It was just an example. I don't know if it's a good example, but just so we use what is happening in the space, in the moment, and in the contact with the artwork. I think just to get into that rhythm about allowing to take your time to be in contact with your senses, I think a lot of people just really enjoy that and have a lot of benefit from that. And I said, I don't know if it's a new space. I think it's something that everybody know, at least from being a child, but also we know it, but sometimes we maybe don't create the space ourselves, or we don't meet it in the social life, because we always have to manage and be in control. And then being allowed to be invited just to be in your senses, take your time, having some exercises that challenge you, and see what happens. You don't have to control the outcome, but see what happens. First, it can be a bit hard because we are so trained in being in control. But afterwards, when we come into that letting go and see what happens, it's a pleasure. And it's not only a pleasure, I said, but also show up some things that we can wonder about and that can benefit, bring something unexpected impulse into the challenges we have. And I think that's pretty much also the feedback I get. The people really enjoy the process, but also meet something unexpected, or something not always unexpected, but something they have forgotten that is important to them. It's not a conclusion. Often it's maybe more a sense. It's an intuition, the brain. And by the end, we try to catch it a bit, but not too much, not to do too much mental conclusions, but try to catch a bit I have this sensation. The work brought me this sensation about I have to slow down. And maybe I really enjoy the slow down. I can really, what it told me, all the process, I really have to slow down. And I can get some gifts by slowing down. And that's maybe the outcome from that workshop or that session. And if it's an individual session, we can talk a bit more about how can you do that in your everyday life. Could you see any possibility having a moment of slow down in your everyday life? And how could you create that, something like that? So this is often the feedback I get, people enjoying the process, but also getting some insights, personal insights. And these insights maybe sometimes is also an idea, but can also be a feeling in a way, intuition, maybe more bodily, inwardly. But we try to bring it also a bit into words, but also to keep the sense in your body-mind in a way. That way it's also an integral work, a body-mind work, and a work individual, but also about the surroundings and your human fellow beings. I find meaning in enjoying the process, but also in this creating the artwork and encounter the artwork. One of the main points in the work is also letting the artwork show you some meaning. So it's not me putting meaning into the artwork. It has to express my relationship to my boss or something. No, we try to create something, create with the materials. And then afterwards, see if it meeting the artwork like it was a person. So I should not interpret it too hard with my ideas. I should open up to let it show me something that maybe remind me of something, but it could also be something that is new to me. That we also open that the surroundings, it could be the nature, it can be the artwork, can bring something meaning into your life that you didn't knew or you are not aware of, or that you have forgotten. So I also like that, because a lot of personal development is very focused on your meaning. And here we are open that the world is bigger than you, and something can show up, beauty can show up and show you something that is not you. And that is amazing, and a wonder, and it's a big gift to get something that is not you. And I think it's very healthy to have this gift of beauty and meaning that you didn't expect, and that you maybe co-created. But it's not only just your creation, it's also something that appeared. It's also something that came from a fold, or something that just appeared, or you found if you were out looking for some materials in the woods, for example, and so on. And I think there's a lot of relief that all meaning is not about you. There's also meaning outside you, but it can bring a lot of meaning to you and increase your personal meaning to have this gift from something outside you. I would say maybe also when I present it now, it seems like you have to be open, a bit passive, but it's a dance, because it's something you respond, you also have to respond to it. So it's not about just sitting there and being open and let things happen, because you have to act with it. You have to give a response. You have to make some choices with these materials that I hand you out, and you only have 5 minutes to create something. So you have to act. You still have to act, but you have to be open as well. To be open, that also maybe often you can also ask, what does the artwork want now? So you also have to serve. You have to serve the situation and the artwork, and not just let the artwork be an effect of your ideas. Then it's not interesting. If you just put one of your mental ideas into a material, nothing has happened in a way. You're just repeating. You're just putting it in another form. Although every time you put it in another form, something happened and something unexpected happened. I have to say that. But just to say, so you are open to that beauty happens in a dance with something outside you. But you also have to take some risk. You have to do something. You have to select what color you're going to do now, or what material do you choose to put together with the other material. So you also have to take some risk, and so it has some consequences. You are active, but you're also open. And I think that's a wonderful human training. So you have to listen outside yourself and inside yourself and take some choices, but also react to what then happens in this artwork that you cannot fully control. If you have a session, you maybe have 1 or 1.5 hours together with the participants. And if you then will take them through different processes, you cannot just say, okay, now you have 45 minutes to paint a picture. Often it's also not that interesting to have a lot of time. This to have a very clarified space and a limited choice of materials. It's also often brings something interesting ahead. But of course, then later in a session, in a workshop, I often end with a bigger work where you have more liberty, more freedom and more time. It's also a way you ask how to get people out of the head. If you only have 2 minutes to follow a music and let your pencil follow the music on a paper with closed eyes, then you don't have time to think about, what should I do? Is it good enough? I don't have time to repeat all my programs. Then I just have to stick with what's happening in a way. So it's also a way of guiding people out of the head in a way. And hopefully with a good stress, it's also just it's a limited time, but also a very limited piece of art that has to appear there. But I also do it to have something raw, so it doesn't get too neat. Because if you have limited time and only have a big piece of coal and a piece of paper, then you cannot do something very neat and controlled. Then you just have to act and see what happens. And it's also a training about letting go of your control in a way and receive what's happening in a limited time. Often in art coaching, you have that much faith in the process. I don't need to say, now we are doing a resilience work. If the people enter and are in a process where they need resilience, the artistic work nearly will bring them in contact with resources and will in itself be a pleasure that will bring new resources to the people. Just to clarify once again, the art coaching doesn't work directly psychology, and it doesn't work direct with issues, but have that much faith in that if we go into the artistic room and processes, something very healthy will come out. Of course, we will help it out, but basically we have a lot of faith in the benefit of the creative process.